speak a little bit to the form and the surface and how you feel about the two being both in the process and in the finished product, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, form and surface has to be a marriage, but at the same time, they're two distinctive parts of the process, because initially I'm building with wet clay and I have no idea what the surface is going to be. I work intuitively to build the form, and it's such a different way of approaching the work than the finish, which is this sort of calculated decision about glazing and firing and the millions of variables involved there. So it's almost like the two opposites at hand there. When building the form, it's free and intuitive, but when working on the glaze, you have to be very calculated and cerebral about it. And getting them to work together is the most important and the most difficult part. You can't have just a great surface and put it on just anything. And same with the form, you can't just have a great form without a wonderful surface as well.
What is your favorite glaze?
Well, it's a long story, but I tend to like Chino glazes, especially with reduction fired work. Obviously, they present a lot of challenges to anyone who is familiar with them. And I really, so these here are a Malcolm Davis Chino glaze, which is in a lot of pieces in this show. That one, the one in the far corner, this one here, the one with the peachy and the black, all of those are different examples of Malcolm Davis Chino, and it's just such a varied glaze. I even have one over there that's a white, that is an example of what it looks like in another way, but you can get so much with just one glaze by varying your application and your firing and all of that. It's really amazing. Fantastic questions. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
There's one aspect of your work that I know we talked about a lot in class, so I kind of know the answer, but I'd like you to share this with everybody else. And that's the idea that in the process, the glazing process and the firing process, there is a certain amount of unpredictability in terms of what the final result is going to be. Mm-hmm. And you intentionally embrace that unpredictability and that risk as part of the work, so that there is an element of surprise to some degree. I know you talked about having to control certain elements of it in the process of finishing the forms, but there's also that element of unpredictability and risk-taking that I find really fascinating, and maybe you can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of it for me is about letting go of expectations. I was an artist for a long time before I found clay, and when I started working with clay, just working with the natural materials and firing ended up being a whole new learning experience of letting go of my expectations, because you would get so upset if you went into any sort of ceramic arts expecting to get your results just like that, like paint to canvas. It's a whole different type of immediacy. When you're working with the clay in your hands, you have that ability to be intuitive and to let all of that sort of chaos reign. And I like that way of working. So with glazing and firing, I have to introduce that to myself as well. I have to allow that unpredictability to be there, otherwise I wouldn't be comfortable. I just sort of thrive in a place like that, where sometimes the result you get is not what you expected, but sometimes you just love it all the more because of that.
What's the point in your process where you step back and say, okay, that's done, it's out of my hands now, and I'm putting it to the fire gun to make something I wanted?
Absolutely. When you're firing that kiln, you're doing all you can do. Those are the last moments, deciding what decisions to make when you're firing. That's the last sort of control you do have, and working with the fire is a very trying experience for sure. With certain types of firing, like with what I'm doing now in my current work, where Heather is helping me fire Clone 6 electric, we essentially just hit a button on the kiln and walk away, and then that's the last moment in that case. But I find when you can control the atmosphere in your firing process, you're that much more involved in the final product.
Ms. Phol, what's your next goal?
To keep making more work and keep turning around that corner into a new body of work. And, you know, I finished this work in March, but my work has changed a lot since, and I want to see it keep going there. And I really, who knows what it will be a year from now. It's just sort of evolving that quickly at this point, which is good. I'm going to keep that momentum, absolutely.
Could you talk a little bit about the color in your work and the color choices and the difference between the warmer pieces and the cooler pieces, and just what you think about that?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it's a very visceral thing of the warm colors being warm-blooded, and they're so creature-like to me, and I sort of see them that way. That in my own mind, in my own vision, that's really the major difference. Is the warm colors are more warm-blooded animals, and the cool colors are more cold-blooded animals, and almost sort of playing into that dichotomy of familiar and alien, of biotic and, you know, abiotic. That the cool colors and the grays are sort of more alien-esque, and the warm colors and the reds really, to me, are more earthy, and I like having them both together as well, and seeing what that does for the work.
You've done some drawings, I know we talked about this too, where
Yeah.
you've used really highly saturated, intense colors in your drawings, and which is very different from this.
Yes.
And I find that really intriguing. I'm just curious to see where you're going to go in the future in terms of your color. It's not really a question,
definitely.
it's just an observation. But
Oh, for sure, and I'm already working in an entirely different color palette just by proxy of working with different firing, but also conceptually it's changed for me too. This body of work specifically, I wanted things to read as really organic, and that's why the focus on those sort of colors is here, and not as many of those saturated colors, which I do like, but for a fully different animal, so to speak.
yeah, because you can't find colors any more saturated than the ones in nature.
It's true, in nature, and in raw, especially I'm inspired by the raw materials that are in Glazes, and the intensity and the vibrancy of those colors. He's right.
And you
don't
talked
see
about
anything like that.
the personalities of your pieces. You know, each one has its own
Yeah.
personality. And color is definitely part of that.
Yes.
You know,
Definitely.
different colors would give them different personalities.
Yeah, and that all depends on the viewer too, which is a huge thing that I embrace, that everyone, however they see it, is right for them. And to me, that talks a lot about collective unconscious. A lot of people will see the same things, the same colors will give them the same feelings, or different. And it talks a lot about our unconscious and how we're all related, and again, how we're all connected in nature and in our nature, psychologically as well. And abstract work especially tends to bring that out in people.
You really managed to capture a sense of these things.
Yeah, emerging. Yes.
And it's very powerful. It's very powerful. And to see it so consistently.
Thank you. Yeah,
Pretty
I
impressive.
like to play with also a binary of growth and decay. Some of them might have sort of a skeletal or melting quality, and that goes hand in hand with the emerging and the growing aspect of them too.
It was beautiful, and it's inspiring to hear you talk about the process
Thank you.
as well. We all need to hear that
Definitely.
over and over and over again. from as many people who
Yeah.
are willing to talk about it.
Do you like to share stories behind each piece, or do you let the person or the viewer try to make that story for themselves and see what corner of the world they might find this creature coming from?
Oh, both and all of that, actually. Yeah, it's very interesting to present them with no context and see what people think versus setting the stage and saying this is what it's called and this is what it's about. You can get a totally different reaction, whichever way.
Do you have a preference?
I prefer the ambiguity because then it starts to get into more about what the viewer is seeing and thinking and feeling, and more about them than about me. It's enough about me already, that I made them, that I think it's interesting to present them. And I've struggled with maintaining between those two things. Do I title it or do I not? Because that becomes a whole can of worms that you open once you go there.